Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We are going to give it just a minute or two to let the rest of our audience members join. So excited to have you all here tonight. We got lots of folks coming in. This is awesome. Okay. Wow. A sweet crowd. Okay, I think for the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education's Zoom platform. We are so pleased and grateful to have you all here this evening. Before we dive into our talk, I just want to quickly share a little more about the museum. OJM-CHE explores the legacy of the Jewish experience in Oregon, teaches the enduring and universal relevance of the Holocaust, and provides opportunities for intercultural conversations. We have a robust programming schedule, which includes book talks, artist-led workshops, programs that inspire civic engagement and democracy, and curator and artist talks. And our members in the audience know that there's a special discount on program tickets when you are a member. So if you're not already, now is a great time to join. For tonight's program, we are going to have time for questions at the end of the presentation and discussion. So please feel free to pop those in the chat or the Q&A box throughout the program, and we will get to them at the end. Okay, and now for a little more about our speakers. We have a great array of rabbis and community members who are going to be speaking tonight. So excited to share space with you all. We have Rabbi Rachel Joseph, who uses she, her pronouns, joined Congregation Beth Israel in July of 2012 and brings her passion, commitment, and leadership for community building to this role. She is a leader in social and racial justice activism, as well as in equity and inclusion efforts within CBI and the greater Portland communities. In the coming years, she will take over as the senior rabbi at CBI and lives in Portland with her wife, Sarah, and their blended family of children and pets, including a dog named Keshet, which is especially relevant tonight. Rabbi Ruhi Sophia Motzkin Rubenstein, uses she, her pronouns, is based in Eugene and became Temple Beth Israel's rabbi in July 2015 after graduating from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. While completing her studies, she served for 2 years as a Cooperberg Ritmaster rabbinical intern at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, New York's LGBTQ synagogue. She is committed to deepening her own Judaism and to constantly finding ways to dialogue and connect with other faith traditions and communities. Our conversation tonight will be moderated by Rabbi Eliana Kayelle, who uses they, them pronouns, who brings a deep love of education and community as Keshet's Bay Area Education and Training Manager. Keshet is a national organization that works for the full equality of LGBTQ+ Jews and our families in Jewish life. In 2022, Eliana launched You Gotta Give 'Em Torah, which offers adult education focused on identity, sexuality, and spirituality. They believe in collective power and radical listening in order to work towards a future where there is liberation for all people. We also have some extra special guest speakers live from Eugene joining us tonight. Enid Left, whose partner Sally Sheklow is featured prominently in the exhibition, as is Enid, and Julie Rayskin, who curated Outliers and Outlaws. So thank you all again for being here tonight. And Eliana, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here with all of you on the panel, and everyone who is attending. For time's sake, I just want to kind of jump into it and get into our discussion that I am very excited to have. So, going through the exhibit, whether you went in person or digitally like I did, it is just so apparent that the lesbian community that formed in Eugene was so sacred in so many ways. So, I want to start off by talking about what are the stories and the lessons from this community that you feel impact the story of the Jewish community? And how can this help us show up and inform how we show up in our communal spaces today? And I'll pass to whoever wants to kick us off.
Sure. Um, It's just an honor to be with all of you. I want to start by saying that, and to, in many ways, lead a community that I got to inherit the work and the struggle of so many of the women featured in this exhibit. Um, so, I mean, what I find so inspiring is the way that these people built so many parallel structures that were in some ways just, the things that they could have had already if they were men or if they were straight, but didn't exist for them because they weren't, but were radically collaborative, radically communicative, um, and really thrived through those structures and found so much joy. I mean, those pictures of the Hodads doing tree planting, like doing this backbreakingly hard work, and how empowering that was for them and how much fun they were obviously having. Uh, I just found so moving. And and I think what I also find really poignant about thinking about this journey is that a lot of those structures ceased to exist as there was more assimilation into the spaces from which they had been rejected. And so when I think about the lesbian historical trajectory that is implicitly and explicitly described in Outliers and Outlaws, there's a story there of both, um, how hard it is when we're not assimilated and the costs of assimilation, what gets lost when groups that have been rejected and marginalized and have to create their own structures then get welcomed into the center. That I think is also very parallel to the general Jewish experience in America. Um, and as we think about this moment right now, where both like anti-Semitism is on the rise and anti-LGBTQ sentiment is on the rise, I think there is some learning there as we think about like what are the structures we create to not just protect but really nurture and nourish ourselves in our communities. That is a very parallel and I hope integrated conversation. Rabbi Rachel?
Yeah. Finding the unmute. Yeah, and I also just it is such an honor to be here and to be in your presence because I feel like I stand on your shoulders. That, to be a queer lesbian out rabbi at a mainline historic congregation in Oregon is because of you, and sort of claiming those spaces and knocking down those doors is how, we were able to be where we are today. I mean, I think it's an interesting then question about that level now of assimilation, integration. What does that mean? Because I also see, what's so powerful about the exhibit was claiming these spaces and these separate spaces and what can you do in separate spaces. And now sort of saying we don't need separate spaces, that we can be who we want, the most authentic that we can be in this very public space all together. And yes, what do we gain and what do we lose from that? But those lessons of being authentically who you are and everything that you are, um, you know, I, I I feel the beneficiary of that. And I know I'm jumping ahead, but I'm really curious about the Jewish aspect. While that wasn't explicit in the exhibit, that there's a disproportionate amount of Jewish women, that how that played out, because I do think that's part of the Jewish experience, right? Of claiming your space and saying, how can we make this our own? And, how can we be authentic and how can we constantly be changing and evolving and growing? And, it feels like such a Jewish experience, that I'm also just I can't wait to be in dialogue of some of that. You're muted,
Julie,
Julie.
I think. Yeah.
I want to just point out that the exhibit that was in Eugene did not focus on the Jewish lesbian experience. but the one in Portland at the Oregon Jewish Museum gave us the opportunity. I mean, we probably had the opportunity before, but I didn't ask enough questions about that experience during the initial 83 interviews. But the opportunity to work with the Oregon Jewish Museum and flesh that out some, because the center of radical feminist work has been lesbian and the Jewish feminists, and in Eugene, the Jewish lesbian feminists were really central to what was happening. It wasn't everybody, but it was a lot of people, and we got the chance to focus on both the Balabustas, which was the lesbian Jewish group that was in Eugene, lesbians who were not affiliated with TBI at the time, and did a lot of wonderful things, including the Freedom Seder, which grows out of the civil rights Freedom Seders of the civil rights movement, and um, and just actually lots of political work that the Jewish lesbians did. So we got a chance to do that. And Enid was in the original Bellabustas for many years and can maybe speak to the kinds of things that that group did and why it was important. And I also just want to think about Bellabustas doesn't exist now, but it may be that it needs to. I mean, there are a lot of Jewish lesbians in Eugene who are not affiliated with TBI, but they also don't have Balabustas. So what's happening for that group as well?
Yeah, I mean, before even Balabustas formally became an entity, Jewish lesbians in Eugene were gathering for Seders and Hanukkah parties and various things like that. And then when we kind of officially formed this group, and it was because we all felt that, like, especially being in a city like Eugene, that we didn't feel 100% safe in the Jewish community being lesbians, and we didn't feel safe being Jewish in the lesbian community. And so to be able to gather with people like us that can understand that, and many of us had known each other for years too, and we did lots of different things. We did social things. We did a monthly Rosh Kodesh, which was very lesbianic, let's say. It was woo-woo sometimes more than being Jewish. Um, and again, we had seders and we did some social action things together. But it was really a chance to be in a place that we felt was safe. And then after after a while, and especially TBI was becoming more and more progressive, especially because of a lot of feminist women that were involved in the congregation. And then some of us started going to TBI because of deaths of parents. And more of us kept going until there were so many of us that were involved in TBI that Bella there wasn't that much of a need for it at that time. But that's also how I got to know Sally, was through Bella Busta, and ended up getting married by the rabbi in TBI. So it was a very important thing in the growth of our community.
And just to be clear, my predecessor, like 30 years ago.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for sharing that. I'm stuck on, wow, to be a fly on the wall during those Rosh Chodesh celebrations would a dream. But yeah, you just touched on some of the Jewish rituals that came up. So now I'm thinking about kind of the opposite of that question, which was, how has the Jewish experience and Jewish teaching help shape Jewish LGBTQ plus community, both Jewishly and not? I was struck by, when I was watching the interviews, someone mentioned about the '93 March on Washington and having the rainbow flag as a chuppah, and all of the pictures of being wrapped in a talit during wedding ceremonies. And also there was the Family Freedom Seder, and there was mention of Harvey Milk and everyone coming out. So I just mentioned a whole bunch, but turning that question to you, with Jewish experience informing lesbian and greater LGBTQ plus community.
I'm not sure if you're looking for retrospective or today but I also thought that's so interesting that the how the Balabusta sort of naturally dissolved looking for a different kind of ritual, or like a main, that like when you needed the burial or the death rituals and the Shiva, and how that then evolved to something more organized, and then you change the organized to fit what you need, and I just sort of love that. And still making the point of all these folks that in Eugene who don't have anything. And I mean, it's the same thing in Portland, it's the same thing everywhere, that as much as we've evolved, that we still know that queer folks are there's some trepidation in walking into a synagogue, or the idea of some sort of organized religion, and is it going to be there? And so sort of circling back to this idea of what do the rituals look like, that even when I feel like we've done so much of trying to queer the rituals, or make things just sort of accessible and open, and language and all this, that it's still not enough, that there's still all this sort of flow of inside and outside, of having these spaces, and then that safety in a space that can come and push an institution to keep doing more and trying harder, and all of those pieces. And so I think a lot about how do I, again, I grew up a Reformed Jew. I grew up actually in a big historic synagogue like the one that I now serve in. And there was sort of an irony, because when I was growing up, I'd said I would never and come back to a place like this. And that was my sort of going out and coming back and saying, actually, I want to take these amazing institutions and I want to make them, more open and more accepting in that way. And then so saying, yes, a Jewish wedding is a Jewish wedding, no matter who is standing here, and we're going to wrap you in whatever we're going to wrap you, and we're going to give you that blessing, and you're going to say the traditional hooray when you exchange your rings, and that is so important. At the same time, we're going to reclaim mikvah, and that it's not your bubby's mikvah, and it's not just about family purity, and how can we commemorate all these important, significant moments in our lives, that other, like coming out, and all of these pieces, or name changes and surgeries and different things that we want to honor in a Jewish context, and we want to talk about it, and it's not a secret. We don't hide it, and we celebrate it, and we support it, and this is who we are. This is what makes us strong and vibrant and carries on to the next generation of Jews. But I just love that there's nothing new under the sun, of just sort of this evolution of just how it keeps coming back, and we just keep pushing a little bit more. It's really beautiful.
How much do you think that we're in a bubble of progressive synagogues? I mean, are most queer Jews not being served by their congregations still?
And the rest of the country?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, Rabbi Eliana probably knows really well by all the contact that you have around the country. And yeah, we definitely live in a bubble. I mean, I'll speak for Portland. I feel so lucky that I got this job. I often say it was either here or I was going to be in suburban New Jersey. And I just count my blessings every day. Sorry for anybody out there who's in suburban New Jersey. That I think the needle has moved, when we talk to colleagues, again, that, and I can speak from a reform perspective. And at the same time, Oregon, we can talk about all the drawbacks of Oregon and our racist history and everything else, which I know the exhibit touches a little bit on. But Portland is definitely in a queer bubble for sure of how, and again, the fact that, you know, I can be in a really large 170-year-old congregation and continue to push the envelope and bring people along on that journey, or, you know, or just in, not even in the Jewish space. I mean, I have children, you know, that have gone through you know, Portland public schools, and when they tell stories and how they can be fully who they are, gay, queer, all over the place. I mean, they push I joke right now, the kids push my buttons with, they teach me now all the proper language to use and everything. And, you know, that's cool. Like, they're not the only you know, queer kid in middle school, and you don't get bullied or anything. That I know is unique to this bubble, I feel like, than some other cities. I think we can pick some cities, but I think it's unique. But maybe
Yeah.
not.
I'd love to share that, like, Keshet is a national organization, so there is work happening in states. We have hubs in Florida and in Texas where the communities are being served in LGBTQ plus belonging in a different way that it might look like in Oregon, or I'm in California. I'm from New York originally, but it is happening, and places like Oregon really set the precedent for now the work that's happening there, even if it's perhaps at a different pace. But it is really fascinating. All right, turn back.
Well, I just wanted to reflect, we're also at like a unique moment in time where a lot of people all over the country have done the work. I think Rabbi Joseph really, Rabbi Rachel, what do you prefer? Whatever, really encapsulated a lot of the ritual reclamation that has been done in Jewish LGBTQ space. But there's also the work of approaching Torah and reclaiming especially the difficult texts in Torah, whether that's like Rabbi Maggie Wenig writing about how God created the human male and female and saying, read that as a merism, or the, like, so many lists of ways that we can alternatively read Leviticus 18:22, or drashes on Parashat Kitetse this week around the line about a man shall not wear the garb of a woman, and how actually that just refers to for the purposes of seduction and for the purposes of deception. And if a person really is a woman, no matter what their anatomy is, then the morally right thing is to wear the garb that represents who they truly are. So that's hard work, because that involves approaching texts that have been traditionally used as weapons against LGBTQ folk, and doing that hard work of transvaluing them and saying, no, no, these belong to me, so they have to mean something else. They have to mean something that speaks to me. But we are now living in a moment where people have been doing that work for a generation. I have, looking over my shoulder, a bobblehead of Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, who was my mentor at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah. She was training rabbinic interns in the 1990s. So there's like 40 or maybe 50 rabbis who were trained directly under Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum at the Queer Synagogue in New York. One of whom, Rabbi B'nai Lappi, started Svara, the queer yeshiva that's based out of Chicago. So if people want to study Talmud in a queer affirming space, like, that exists. That's amazing. That exists right now, despite everything horrible politically that is happening. You can go to a queer Talmud class, but also you can be a very queer person, out queer person, going to the Hadar Institute in New York or taking their courses online. And Hadar is this amazing egalitarian yeshiva that is not explicitly queer, but has a lot of queer faculty, and it has a lot of queer students and is very queer positive. And so I think there is this piece as well that's really important. And I think also speaks to the point you made, Julie, that it's hard work. It's hard work to approach Jewish text and to approach Jewish ritual with all the baggage that is behind it. And I think that work is so enriching. And obviously, there's a strong subset of the community that thinks that work is enriching and worth it. Um, but it is a threshold. I want to share a comment. A few years ago, the Hadar Institute hosted some talk on inclusion and feminism and queerness that was moderated by Rabbi Aviva Richman and my friend Lainey, Rabbi, no, not Rabbi, Lainey Solomon, who's I think got a PhD in rabbinics and teaches at Svara and teaches at a bunch of places, um, spoke about this text that they study at Svara that says that to be a rabbi in the ancient Sanhedrin, I'm afraid I'm going to butcher it, but I think this is what the text says. A rabbi would need to be able to articulate 70 ways letaheret hasheretz, which is to say that a creepy crawly thing that is the definition of impure, to make the argument that it is actually pure, that is a rabbi should be able to bring those arguments. And Lainey says when they first studied that text, that was the first time that instead of feeling like a sheretz, they felt like a rabbi. And so I think we're in this amazing moment where, there's three queer rabbis on this panel right now. And it's not, I don't know that it's a bubble in space, but it might be a bubble in time.
Yeah, not a bubble in space, but a bubble in time. Gonna sit with that. Um, but I love all these things that you're touching on, and they're speaking to these real radical shifts and radical perspectives and change of perspective that have happened in our community in so many ways. And I have two questions that are going together in my mind right now, which is we've used the word queer as a verb now a few times in queering tradition and queering Torah. So I would love to know when we use queer as a verb like this, what does that mean to you? What qualifies as queering tradition and queering ritual? And then the other part is what radical shifts are we still hoping to make? Some dreaming together. But first, would love your take on queering.
I think the project of queering changes in its definition generationally because the boundaries change. And so, and this may be controversial. I'm sure it is. Um, but I think it's about more than sexual orientation or gender identity. It is the project of looking at who's being marginalized by the way we're talking and how do we change the discourse so that we are bringing them in.
Yeah, I was going to say it's lifting up voices that we haven't heard before. And I think to what Rabbi Ruhi, what you were speaking to, that there's so much more access. So all of these organizations or these amazing thinkers and writers that you can actually access without a go-between. Their material you can learn online, you can read, you can find community. But also, I still am not sure about the bubble piece. And I think that we're connected in such significant ways that we weren't. And so when you think about even like everyone, this exodus to Eugene, because you also, I mean, nothing replaces in-person and community and the utopia that you created. And thinking about, when you can't, everyone can't necessarily leave where they're from or move to a different community that they feel is more open, but they can still access Jewish wisdom and Jewish thinkers and, communities in which they can lift up the marginalized and all of these voices is also, I think, this amazing moment that we're in, and what that will look like. I mean, we've all been wrestling with this, and the technology is moving so quickly. I mean, COVID really forced that, but where we're headed in the future. But I do think that that's really significant, of how we're able to connect. other queer Jews too.
And I think it's amazing, about queering the texts and queering the rituals. And there's something I don't know about sort of the pastoral part of this, because it's also that we're of different generations. And so what queer people need, what older queer people need, and what younger queer people need, there's overlap, but there's also difference because of the times in which we were raised. And I'm curious about that, like how you, as rabbis, deal with how you queer those relationships and that counseling part um, across generations when you're dealing with not just the shame that came from the Jewish religious institutions, but from the families and communities. And some of that is shared and some of it isn't. And so I think that queering verb needs to happen also, and I'm sure it does. I'm not in those rooms with you, so I don't know the kinds of things that you deal with in the pastoral sense of being a rabbi.
It's not, I mean, to be honest, that's not my primary goal in a pastoral sense, because I find Judaism is sufficiently countercultural for like my Jewish pastoral tools to often, I suppose, queer people's internal discourse. So I'll give an example. I encounter a lot of people who are struggling because they think they should forgive someone who abused them or who forced them into the closet. And that's natural. We live under Christian hegemony. There's this glorification of forgiveness that makes it the victim or the survivor's responsibility. And so it's very liberating when I study with these people, when I introduce these people to like the Maimonidean concept of teshuvah, and at what point in that process an obligation to forgive kicks in. And we talk about like, well, has this person expressed remorse? Has this person attempted to do teshuva with you? Have they even admitted they hurt you? Like there's, and the conversation where people realize like, oh, I might want to let go of what I can let go of for my own mental health, but I don't have to like wish this person well. I don't have to forgive them. I don't have to say things are okay between us, is really often one of the most profound things I can offer people pastorally. And that's as far as I'm concerned, that's Judaism. Like, but that's Judaism that is, I suppose we could say, queering people's experience.
When you said that, it reminded me of Julie, when you talked about sort of how do you speak to different generations. And I was on faculty for a retreat, and um, part of my duties was, having pastoral meetings with people. And so this is not in my congregation, but I had this really powerful conversation with a woman who was an elder lesbian, who felt totally rejected from Judaism and had just been, just felt like she had been cast aside. And to spend the time to talk about how she is creating God's image and there is a place for her, and we had this very amazing, powerful conversation of just she needed to be seen and validated and heard. And she actually wrote to me later about how she went back to the city where she was from, and she's found a Jewish community, and she feels like she can, access Jewish life for the first time in like 50 years. And clearly she was already seeking it because she came to this retreat. Um, but she needed that permission. She needed a space to say, oh, I can see myself, or I can see how things can change. There can be a place for me. And I think you're right in the different generations where, if I look at our religious school and our teens who are like, we are here, we have a space, like, you know, and that is very different from a generation. I mean, my generation's like on the cusp. Like I was afraid to come out, but my youth group advisor, was my savior who was like, it's okay, and then the generation before. And so I do think if to continue to say we have a space and we are here, and Judaism it's yours, and let's co-create this and partner this together, and again, be who you are and all of that.
Yeah, thank you. It's making me think of how queer is used as a system critique, and how when we queer ritual and queer tradition, not only is it, I mean, like the words that you were using, it's serving, it's uplifting folks who haven't been in the moment, but it also sets a precedent and creates commentary for future generations, and how a queering creates commentary for the next generation, which I think is really beautiful. And we also touched on some of the challenges of intergenerational community and relationship and how we can continue queering tradition. And throughout the exhibit, there were many challenges that I think are still very relevant, that were things like coming out, identity suppression, finding belonging, aging community, and how we can care, in both at micro and macro levels. So I'm wondering what you think moves are that we can either begin to create or that we can continue to mitigate these challenges that exist.
And I think a lot of it, I think a lot about co-creation, of really trying to, again, meet people where they're at, of 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 having those conversations, of bringing people in, and you know all these different ways in which you can mark life and life transitions and moments, and how do we bring meaning to that, and how do we make that Jewish when it wouldn't even cross your mind, that this could be a Jewish ritual moment. And again, I think a lot to the younger generation who continues to push me and says, we need this and we need that, and how can we create this space? I mean, I had a fifth grader ask me why we don't have like a queer support group in religious school, for our elementary kids. And I was like, okay, like if that's something you want to do, then we should do it. Because even in my head, thinking about high school, and I mean, even just such little things of like, yes, how do we just, this is just part of our lives, and this is part of our community, and this is part of our Jewish community, that we are in this together, and through modeling, I think as rabbis, how as we all have different feelings, I'm sure, about our public and private and all of that, and how much we share, and model that for community about my own rituals or observances or life experience, and again, creating an environment in which folks feel comfortable, having these conversations, and you know asking for what they need, or again, having those conversations create this space of like, oh, this is what we can create together. I know, we talk about liturgy and ways of crafting liturgy and poetry and song and all of this to bring into our various spaces, and not just one time a year, but all these different moments. It's just it's part of the rhythm.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we try to do implicitly just to communicate welcome beyond, the welcome sign. But um, I had a para-rabbinic intern a couple of years ago who's non-binary, who pointed out to me that a lot of places in the liturgy refer to our brothers and sisters. And so we now say our siblings and cousins in most of those places. Um, and Sally Sheklow of blessed memory, Enid's partner, a couple of years ago sort of said, Rabbi, you need to write a liturgy for Pride Month. So I wrote a queer liturgy that we read. And I said, like we all read it at services. It's pasted into the Siddur, and it's not for queer people to read. It's for all of us to read on Pride Shabbat and a couple other Shabbats during the year, the Shabbat of Trans Day of Remembrance and Trans Day of Visibility. Where we talk about it's modeled off of Ahava Rabbah, so we talk about divine love as self-love, modeled through self-love and the struggle. And I also think as we think about queering, like to invert the question, and I'm cautious because I know it also appropriates the terms and perhaps in what is almost certainly an unwelcome way. Like, what does it mean to queer when in our synagogue, like we have a trans board member and there's who's here. Hi, Jacob. And we have, and lesbians have been on the board for ages, um, and, I sometimes say, I sometimes think to myself, like, boy, everything good that's happening at this synagogue is being done by the lesbians who have been around forever. And which is just to say, like, we have this big statement of principles on our door right now about all the things we believe. And I think, like, if I were a politically conservative Jew, I would come and look at that statement and think, I'm not welcome in this building. So is that a challenge worthy of taking up? We're in a one, and I ask, and I think it is. And then the question is like, well, how do we take up that challenge while not rejecting or scaling back the gains we've made in welcoming for our queer community members and other community members who have been historically marginalized? But I can positively identify that the group that is most likely to be marginalized from our community right now are Jews who identify as politically conservative. And obviously that's not an immutable identity. And we can discuss, what identities are mutable and immutable. But when I think about the frontiers of welcoming, that comes up for me too.
Do we want to go there? I mean, because there's an interesting, if we look at the exhibit and we look at sort of, there was, the tie between activism and sexuality was very, very linked. And is that what we're sort of saying today of, what's mutable and what's immutable sort of in these ways of, I don't think that, queerness necessarily, equals a certain political values, or at least, I think there has to, part of this moment, there has to be space for, all of that. And maybe that's, the milieu that I operate in is trying to hold all of that doesn't become that, my sexuality or whatever doesn't become a this idea equals a radical political ideology. And I can hold radical political thoughts in these ways, but how do we sort of separate that on some level? But that's where I feel like there are some things that are immutable. And I don't know if, sort of, an interesting piece, because it is like, you knock down the door that I got to moderately walk through. So how does that feel if I say that, sitting pretty here, not having to worry about losing my job because I came out. So I can say those things that you couldn't say a generation ago.
And I also want to acknowledge that it's a little, yes, and we can create these spaces, and I think we do create these spaces that are really welcoming and affirmative and safe. I hope. I hope my congregants who are on would be giving me more feedback if they weren't. And trans people are under attack by our government right now in extremely violent and scary ways. And so I think there's also the question of what is the responsibility of a Jewish community in this moment, a Jewish community that wants to be welcoming and affirmative and a safe space, to say, like, okay, the safe space we create within these walls is not enough. And I wonder, I think what is so inspiring about Outliers and Outlaws is it offers this model that raises all these questions about, like, when your very being is illegal or not celebrated, like, how do we create spaces, not just in one spot, not just in the community center, not just in the bedroom, but like whole institutions that are holistically supportive, whole alternative economies. I would be very curious to hear from Julie and from Enid and from anyone else who lived through this. And I want to acknowledge there's at least one other person who's here as an attendee who is an Outliers and Outlaws interviewee.
Several people.
Several people. But to hear your reflections on sort of what is, I know, like, economically it was a really different time in terms of what was possible, but like, what of the institutions that were created could be recreated? What of the institutions that were created might be necessary to recreate in some form in this moment?
Can any of the people who are the attendees want to weigh in a little bit?
Mariah or Gail, is there a way to have that happen?
Oh,
Yes, exactly what
Yep.
Gail just said. I don't see any hands raised. So maybe Julie or Enid wants to start us off.
Well, it definitely was a different time. And I think financially that had a big, huge part of it, is that we didn't, it was really cheap to live. We didn't have large college loans that we had to pay off, and like, and also in Eugene, one of the things about being in Eugene is that there were so many other alternative things happening. The co-ops, especially in the food industry, and everything from the Oregon Country Fair, or all those different kinds of alternative places that were happening, that it was easier, I think, for us to kind of fit into some of that. But one of the things that I have learned from being involved with Outliers over the last couple of years and meeting a lot of young people through it is that, which always surprises me, that they're very inspired and interested in what we did and how we did it and want to know what they can do now. And so there's definitely enthusiasm and interest in doing not exactly what we did, but being able to create their own community. Um, and I think that the other thing that's really exciting to me is that when I look back to the lesbians, the older lesbians I knew when I was first coming out, and how different I felt from them, especially since I was coming out through feminism, and the change that happens all the time. And so I look at the queer community, young queers now, and us older lesbians have had to learn a lot about how to deal with the whole gender identity, and that there was a lot of uh, and there still is some resistance to trans people, and but it's so exciting to me to see that there's now, queers are, are becoming something even larger and more exciting than when we are. And so I'm not sure if I'm really addressing this, but um, I think that things are just going to keep moving, and I'm looking forward to seeing how people the queer community is changing and learning to live in this world that we're in that's changing so much.
And I would say that what's really exciting to me is the intergenerational interest. So the discussion about identity online can be really vitriolic and both ways, from older people to younger people. But in person, it doesn't seem that way. Like we have done a lot of work in Eugene to have intergenerational meetups. We have potluck, 100 people come of all ages. I mean, all age, every decade. And when we didn't, I don't think we talked to our elders as much, and we needed to. And they seem to be interested in talking to elders right now. And the connections that are happening, I think institutions will come from them. They'll be their projects, or there's just many projects happening right now, that young people and former students of mine are doing, and older people are trying to do right now. And those conversations, and Enid's been a part of these long conversations over dinners and with young people, and meetups and so forth. So I think that's different than was when we were young, and I think it's really generative.
Mm. Thank you both so much for sharing that. Um, Touching on how, yeah, the structures form because of our intergenerational relationships and this desire to have that. And also, Enid, you touched on how even while that question is being asked of what can we learn and what can we do, naturally it happens while we're doing that. And how queer community just sticks together. And one of my favorite quotes from the interviews that I pulled was that all the shit is there, but you still go on and live your life. And that's it. Like we still go on, we still have community, we still form these structures. Um, and yeah, it's just truly, I'm just in awe of it while it happened, while you were part of it, you're sharing, and here we are doing it again and continuing it. Um, so I think we have just the last question. I want us to dream a little bit. So I'd love if all of you answered. But what inspires you to keep dreaming and building and creating, even while all the shit is happening?
Even though I've been involved in the queer community since the 70s, I'm very involved in the lesbian community. Um, I realize now that, especially the last few years, and especially through this project, that I am even more in touch and more surrounded by this queer community. young people and older people. And it's just so hopeful to me. And it's so meaningful to how it's changed my life and continues to.
And I'd say that the audience discussions that happen after the screenings of the documentary Outliers and Outlaws have just been amazing. They're like little happenings that, and they're different every time, but they're really interesting. So I do want to encourage people that the Oregon Jewish Museum is hosting the screening on October 5th at the Tomorrow Theater. And it's very fun to see this film in audience and then to have a discussion afterwards. And Enid, I think all the participants of the film will be there, and I'll be there as well on October 5th.
Somebody said to me earlier today, it's a business phrase. I think that's you never want to waste a crisis, something to that effect. And I think that in a Jewish context, we're the best in crisis. We're the best in chaos. And so much creativity and life comes out of that. We have the tools, we've had the tools for thousands of years, and we're just constantly retooling them and creating something new and dynamic. And that's what gives me hope. I mean, I can existentially hold on to that and just, look back and see what was created. And I get hope, hearing you're having all these conversations locally but what that could do. And, that we're all in that, we're all trying to figure out what to do. But our tradition is set up to help us and, hope is a verb. And so I'm in it, we're in it, we're working. And I believe that the future will be amazing.
I mean, I find Judaism and Torah so inspiring, but I don't take for granted that other people do. As I said, there's barriers. And so I'm also constantly inspired by the people who, despite those barriers, find Judaism inspiring. There's someone who's an attendee here who's a trans non-binary teenager who is in the process of converting to Judaism. And like the love that this person brings and the inspiration that this person takes from what we are doing and the evolving Torah, I find so inspiring. And I also want to say that like sometimes I don't feel inspired, and then the bedrock of obligation that Judaism offers pulls me through, when it feels inspiring and when it doesn't. And obligation isn't sexy, and it itself is a little countercultural in this age of like everyone do what you feel like and don't be accountable to anyone. But I think like what is so beautiful about the communities that of Outliers and Outlaws and the communities that we are continuously trying to create is that even though there is so much of the expectations that society put on you, on us, that you rejected, you still found a way to be obligated to each other, to create, not to say like, well, to hell with it, I don't care about anybody, but to like create communities of deep caring and deep accountability. And I'm so inspired, even when it is hard and not inspiring, by the vision of communities of deep caring and deep accountability.
Thank you all so much. So much of what you said resonates with me very deeply. I've got a chat that I should also answer this question. So I'll share what inspires me to keep going. Right now, as a trans non-binary person, it is challenging, but it's the intergenerational relationships, I think, that really keep me going. I am so blessed to have a number of queer elders that I get to work with and that I'm in community with. And I get to work with the first openly trans person admitted to a mainstream rabbinical seminary, Rabbi Rubenstein. And then also I work with kids who often they share with me and they are non-binary themselves, and I'm the first trans rabbi that they got to meet. And just holding space for that and being in the in-between really means the world and is the reminder of why I do this, why I pick up the torch and why I keep going. So that is my answer to the question. I want to express so much gratitude to all of you for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your presence, especially Julie and Enid, who jumped on to join us in the conversation very last minute. Just so much appreciation for all of you and what you've shared. And before we close out, I will pass it to Mariah for just some closing, but just endless gratitude for me.
And same from me. Thank you all so much. That was such an enriching conversation and so important, I think, to grapple with these questions and really get into it. And I so appreciate the vast geographic reach that we have in our audience and in our panelists. So thank you all again for making the time to be here tonight, and to Julie and Enid especially. And Enid, I'm sorry I got your last name wrong at the beginning, but thank you, Rabbi Ruhi, Sophia, for sharing that correction. And again, yeah, thank you all for being here tonight and for your conversation and your wisdom. And thank you, Julie, especially for creating this exhibition, and Enid and all of the participants in the audience. What a gift it is, and what a blessing it will continue to be. Here, as Gail just reminded us, it's here in person in Portland through October 26th, but it lives online forever. And so we will, be sharing resources about this and have more programs to come, including that screening on October 5th. And some other fun programs, including a Shabbat dinner at Congregation Beth Israel next Friday, if you're local here in Portland, and more to come. So sign up for our newsletter, check out our website, and stay tuned for more. Thank you all again.
Thank you.